As we get into this, I want us to all remember that St. Mark is a family of God. We do seek to honor Jesus Christ, to worship, to love, to reach, to teach, and to serve the glory of God. This should be the bedrock of the conversation that we're going to have tonight. And I want you to remember that every person has sacred worth. David in Psalms, he talks about God as almost as a craftsman, as building a human being in the womb. So listen to his words. He says, "For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well." And that's from Psalms 139, 13, and 14. So every person has sacred worth. And Paul tells us we're all sinners. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, the one who created us. So remember this, that St. Mark welcomes all who come to worship with us. So why are we here today? I think with the turnout that we have, it's because a lot of people want information. You've heard about the churches leaving the United Methodist, or individual churches leaving the United Methodist Church. Recently in South Georgia alone, 62 churches decided to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church or leave the church, and y'all would like to know why. And so just to be flat out honest with you starting off, the main issue is it has to do with the debate over human sexuality. And then we're going to talk about that as we get into this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the backstory and how we got here first. But before we do that, let's talk about the makeup of the United Methodist Church, how the church is structured as a whole. And that's going to be important in our conversation. First of all, we have our local churches. Our local church, St. Mark United Methodist Church, is a local church. We're bound by the Book of Discipline, which is put out by the United Methodist Church, but our churches are very autonomous in what we can do. We can choose our own worship styles. We can choose the songs we use. We can choose the programs that we provide, or we have full choice over that, okay? So that's the local church. The next level up would be our conferences. We are part of the South Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church, along with about 400 plus other churches in South Georgia. We don't really hear much about the work of the conference except for maybe in June when they start to assign pastors to churches, especially if one's being moved. So, they're the ones, the bishop of the South Georgia Conference is the one who appoints a pastor to the local church, and our bishop is David Graves, and we'll talk a little bit about him in a little while. After that, we have Episcopal areas. And so y'all remember that. We're going to come back to Episcopal areas in a minute. But Episcopal areas are conferences that are put together in geographical regions that form an Episcopal area. And then bishops are elected in Episcopal areas to serve in the Episcopal area that they're in. So we're in the southeast Episcopal area, and we're about to have elections soon for bishops, and we're hoping that at that time that David Graves will be reelected as the bishop for our conference here. And then you have the General Conference. The General Conference is the only body that can set official policy and can speak for the denomination. It meets every 4 years. So every 4 years, General Conference meets, usually at a convention-style thing for a week. And it sets the rules and establishes procedures for virtually every aspect of the church's life. The General Conference is what puts out the Book of Discipline. So the rules that the General Conference decides on goes into the Book of Discipline, and that's what the local churches have to follow. Now, all the different conferences get to send delegates, both lay people and clergy, to the General Conference, and they're the ones who actually vote on the different policies of the church. So how did we get to where we are right now? Well, here's a little bit of the backstory. The first time the United Methodist Church took a stance or a voice as it related to homosexuality was at a General Conference in 1972. That was 50 years ago that the debate has been going on. There was a proposal at that time to include a statement that homosexuals are people of sacred worth, and this passed with an additional statement added to it that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And in 1976, the General Conference banned same-sex couples from being married in United Methodist churches. In 1984, the conference ruled that self-avowed and practicing homosexuals could not be ordained as United Methodist clergy. And in 1988, General Conference banned United Methodist clergy from performing same-sex marriages. And up until this day now, the General Conference has continually affirmed the biblical teaching that marriage is between one man and one woman. In 2015, the marriage equality became the law of the land in the United States. Supreme Court decisions granted same-sex couples in all 50 states the rights to full, equal recognition under the law, allowing for same-sex couples to be married. The next year, in 2016, General Conference met. And they took up again this issue of human sexuality. And things started to get out of hand pretty quickly there. By 2016, many U.S. Methodist clergy members had already publicly officiated same-sex marriage ceremonies going against the Book of Discipline. More than 100 clergy and clergy candidates came out as gay on the eve of the beginning of the General Conference. African bishops at the conference, the bishops in Africa are very conservative in their theological thought, and they encourage delegates not to budge on the church's teachings. And even at that time, a legislation was put forward that would allow congregations to leave the denomination and take their property with them. But they didn't take a vote on that at that time, and that was something that was big. That had never been talked about before, as far as letting churches leave the denomination like that. So that was happening at the 2016 General Conference, and the bishops of the church, the council of bishops, saw what was happening here at this conference. Feelings were getting hurt. People were saying things, and so they were like, "Hey, let's take a pause." They asked the council bishops asked the conference if they could delay the debate on homosexuality. They asked for permission to name a special commission on human sexuality as it relates to the church, and this commission would sit down and try to figure things out, and then they would call for a special general conference later on. So they did this. The Commission on Way Forward is what it was called. We'll just call it the commission tonight, but it was formed at that time. It existed. It was going to help the United Methodist Church explore and discern ways to move forward with regards to this conversation regarding human sexuality. And it was going to represent the different regions of the denomination from the 4 continents that we were on. And it was also going to have representation from varied perspectives of the church. Again, the Council of Bishops indicated they would call a special session of the General Conference to deal with the recommendations from this special commission, which they did. They did that in 2019. They met, they came together, and they came up with a couple of plans they wanted to present to the General Conference. Now, yeah, you heard me say a couple, and you see 3 up there. It's interesting. They came up with 2 plans, actually, and the third plan, their traditional plan, they decided, well, we don't need to come up with that plan because that's where we are right now. And they didn't think that there was much, I guess the best word, they didn't think there was a lot of support for that, since there had been so much rancor at the 2016 General Conference. So it was just a footnote. But they came up with the 2 plans, the one church plan, which will allow but not require same-sex marriage and ordination of LGBTQ couples. This plan would allow churches to stay connected, and the pastors and the congregations of each local church to make the decision for themselves. The other plan they came up with was the Connectional Conference Plan. This plan was the United Methodist Church would form 3 kind of value-based conferences in the United States, and then the rest of the world would stay the way it was at that time. So they would have a more liberal, a centrist maybe, and a conservative conference that would be formed. Now, when I use those words, liberal, centrist, conservative, I want everyone to make sure you understand that we're talking about their theological views and not their political views. And, because sometimes we hear those words all the time, especially, in the news. So we're talking about their theological views. So this was a plan that was backed. The people that did this, the Commission on the Way Forward, the members of that commission, they liked this plan the best because they thought it really was best aligned with how the United Methodist Church actually was at the time, or at that time. And then you had the traditional plan, the plan that was already in place. So at the 2019 General Conference, these plans were presented, and the conference passed a traditional plan again. The traditional plan was approved by General Conference with a vote of 438 yes votes to 384 no votes. So you see there's a 53 to 47% on the vote. And the traditional plan maintained, again, the United Methodist Church's current stance on issues regarding homosexuality. It included the ban on ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexuals and the ban on ordained ministers officiating same-sex marriage ceremonies. The members of the General Conference at that time thought that there was going to be some disagreement with churches, and some may wanted to leave. They thought with this traditional plan that maybe more liberal churches would want to leave the congregation. And so they decided at the time that they would come up with a method for churches that if they wanted to, they could leave for reasons of conscience. And by doing this, they came up with they added a paragraph to the Book of Discipline. This paragraph was paragraph 2553. So you'll hear a lot about 2553, and I wish it was something easier to say than that, but it's just paragraph 2553. And this graceful exit is disaffiliation. This is what churches are leaving by this paragraph, disaffiliation. But after they approved this, it wasn't a lot of, it was not just liberal churches that were leaving. Conservative churches also did. So both conservative and liberal-leaning churches used this process to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. So any church that plans to leave the denomination, they have to do it by this paragraph, by 2553. There's no other way currently for a church to leave the denomination. Paragraph 2553 of the Book of Discipline says if a church wants to disaffiliate, there's things the congregation has to do, the district superintendent has to, and then the conference we must take the request to the conference, and the conference would have to vote on it at the annual conference. So generally that's in June of every year that South Georgia has their annual conference, and if a church decides to do that, they need to have all the process done so that it can be voted on in June at the annual conference for that. So if a church decides they want to disaffiliate, there has three things they have to do. They have to make a decision, and it has to be based on two-thirds majority, a vote of two-thirds majority of the professing members present that day at a church conference. So if the church decided they were going to do that, two-thirds of the members present voting would have to approve a disaffiliation. The church would have to make a payment in full of 2 years of our congregation's apportionments, and those apportionments are set by the conference. But we know what those are. We pay those every year. And then we'd have to make a payment in full of our pro rata share of the conference's pension liability. And this is based on a formula that was approved by the annual conference. When they wrote this 2553, they put a deadline or a sunset date on this. Any church that wants to leave, the process has to be done by December 31st, 2023. And we'll get back to that in a minute because that's an important deadline, and we'll talk about why that deadline is what it is. If St. Mark chose to disaffiliate, the last number that we received was that it would cost us approximately $350,000 to disaffiliate. That would be $165,000 of our apportionment, and then it would be our pension liability would be $185,000. So approximately $350,000. So you may be asking, why would we do that? Why would we just not walk away and say we don't want to be members of the United Methodist Church anymore? And it's because of this, the trust clause. I like to call it the tie that binds us all together. All property held by a United Methodist Church is held in trust for the benefit of the entire denomination. We're required to use our property exclusively for the purpose of and to benefit the United Methodist Church. And if we can no longer do that, or we choose not to do that, then our property, we forfeit the right to our property. And it's transferred back to the South Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church. So in reality, the South Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church holds our property in trust, and they actually own our property because we are subject to this trust clause. And the trust clause is in the Book of Discipline, and we do the things that outline, that we are part of a United Methodist Church, so we're subject to that. If we were to walk away from everything, United Methodist Church would retain ownership. But if we paid the $350,000 to disaffiliate, we'd be released from the trust clause, and the property would become St. Mark's property. So that's part of the $350,000 releases you from the trust clause, or those payments do. After the 2019 General Conference met, there was a realization by some people that this paragraph 2553 was costly and it had deadlines. So in July of 2019, Bishop John Yamboso assembled a small but diverse group to share ideas how to navigate this conflict and reduce the cost of the graceful exit. In the fall of that same year, he put together a larger group representing progressives, centrists, traditionalists, and they met with a mediator. And their meetings resulted in what they called the Protocol on Recognition and Grace Through Separation. We'll just call it the protocol for right now. This protocol was nothing binding at the time, but if it were to be approved, it would allow traditional congregations and conferences to leave the United Methodist Church, taking with them their property. It would also the United Methodist Church would give $25 million to form a new, more conservative Methodist denomination. And then after that happened, the post-separation United Methodist Church would meet later and repeal language barring LGBTQ United Methodists from ordination and marriage. So this was how the protocol was put out. The protocol was presented to several general conferences, which it passed, which made it go into legislative form, and it was to be presented at the 2020 General Conference. But no one really could foresee at the time that in 2020 there was going to be a pandemic that took over the world. The General Conference in 2020 was canceled. Due to COVID, it was rescheduled for 2021, canceled again in 2021, and canceled in 2022 for the same reasons, for COVID. The decision at that time was made to have the next General Conference in 2024. So there would be no 2020 General Conference. We would just punt the ball down the field and go ahead and meet in 2024. After the third postponement in 2022, some traditionalists who were in favor of the protocol, they got tired of waiting and announced they were going to go ahead and launch the Global Methodist Church. Many of the churches that have disaffiliated have joined the new Global Methodist Church. Other churches haven't. Some church, like Fraser United Methodist in Montgomery, they decided to go and join the Free Methodist Church. Some churches have just become independent and free of any denomination. Now, the Global Methodist Church was more than likely going to be the new conservative Methodist denomination, but they decided to go ahead and form early so that churches that were disaffiliating would have a plan or a place that they could land when they did disaffiliate, so that they have some kind of something to connect them together. But with them leaving early, it's kind of thrown a wrench into those plans. And now the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church, they have allegations kind of going back and forth between the two based on things. So, that's where we are. So that's the backstory. That's kind of how we got to where we are right now. So you may ask, so first of all, before we do anything, I want to make sure everyone knows that nobody in the United Methodist Church is asking any congregation to disaffiliate or consider disaffiliation. So you might be asking, why are churches deciding to disaffiliate now? There are pastors and there are bishops in the United Methodist Church that since 2016 have performed same-sex marriages. There are some that have done it over and over again. There are some bishops and some conferences who have said they will not obey the Book of Discipline and the ban on same-sex marriage. So churches are disappointed in that there's no accountability when it comes to, or no one has taken action against clergy who perform same-sex marriages. They're disappointed that self-avowed homosexual clergy are being ordained or allowed to continue in their role. And some are tired of the distraction, really. Some churches are just tired of the distraction. But for many, it comes down to accountability. They feel there's no accountability for bishops and pastors who have violated, and in some cases continue to violate, the Book of Discipline and the policies on the issue of human sexuality. Some churches don't approve of the current stance that the United Methodist Church has taken on this issue, really. And then many of the conservative churches believe that the lack of discipline of bishops and pastors that have violated church law show the true heart of the denomination and where it's heading. So many of them believe that there's a shift in the beliefs of the denomination. The denomination may be heading somewhere else. There's probably many more. So why have some that have not followed the Book of Discipline not been held accountable, you might ask? Little history lesson here for that. General Conference, top level, used to oversee and appoint all bishops. But in 1939, the Methodist Church from the north merged with the Methodist Church from the south to form the Methodist Church. The southeast, the Episcopal area that we're in at the time, they wanted to establish jurisdictions. The southeast pushed this because, one, they did not want a northern bishop, and two, they did not want a black bishop. So after this request was granted, jurisdictions were formed across the United Methodist Church. The southeast jurisdiction did not want outside interference from anyone. And in our current structure, only jurisdictions can hold their own people accountable. So a bishop from the southeast jurisdiction could not bring charges against a bishop in another jurisdiction. So each jurisdiction has a lot of autonomy there. And that's one reason why accountability is so hard to have accountability. So what are our options at St. Mark? We don't have to do anything at all. That is actually an action. That is taking an action. We can say we are United Methodist today, United Methodist tomorrow. We don't, whatever happens, we're United Methodist, period. And we'll follow whatever the General Conference says. We can do that. We can wait and see what happens at the next General Conference that takes place in 2024. That's what our Bishop Graves, is encouraging churches to do, to wait until 2024. He believes that something good is going to happen in 2024. The protocol that we talked about, in 2024, it's going to be presented. It's already in legislative form. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty about that, though. I read an article the other day, and someone was talking about how, if you think about if a couple decided to get a divorce in 2019, and they came up with an agreement, and then they just put it in the drawer, and they waited to 2024 to see, to finalize it, many things probably had changed in that time. And many things have changed in the church in this time, too. The Wesley Covenant Association, which is a conservative group that represents conservative-leaning Methodist churches, they're still supporting the passage of the protocol, but representatives of the centrist and progressive advocacy groups and clergy people from the Philippines who had negotiated the actual protocol and signed it, they've published statements saying that they no longer in good faith can support a plan or this plan or work toward the adoption of this plan. So there's waning support now for this protocol. So even though it's going to be presented, there's no way to know if it would even pass or if anything would happen. And then there may be other options available or other things that happen in 2024. We just don't know. We don't have that crystal ball to see into the future. So that is all very uncertain at this time. We could disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church under paragraph 2553. That is an option. Again, if the church decided to take that option, that will be something that the congregation has to approve. That would be a 2/3 vote of those present at a church conference voting to say we wanted to leave the United Methodist Church. Or in reality, we could just walk away and start a new church somewhere else. Now that would not be maybe a fiscally responsible, as we're sitting on much more in property than what it would cost us to disaffiliate, but it is possible we could do it. But we're going to have to make a decision at some level here at the church, either church council or if we decide to disaffiliate, a full vote of the membership. And when we do that, I want y'all to also know that our pastors may make a different decision than the church. Our pastors do not go with the church. They have to make a decision themselves, whether they want to stay with the United Methodist Church or whether they want to leave the United Methodist Church. And so we don't know what would happen there. So, if we decide to stay and they wanted to go, then we would have to get a new pastor. If we decide to go and they wanted to stay, then we'd have to get a new pastor. If we decide to go and they wanted to go, then we could take them with us. So, but they may make a different decision. So, because they are appointed here, they get to make that decision for themselves. We can talk a little bit about some deadlines. Like we said, paragraph 25, the book of discipline expires December 31st, 2023. Now, originally, in 2019, this was no big deal because, hey, we're going to have General Conference in 2020. Everybody's going to have 3 years to figure out what they want to do. But then We never had General Conference. In reality, though, we have to have a decision made by June of 2023 so that it can be voted on by the South Georgia Conference at the meeting, General Conference meeting there. So that would have to be done really by June of that year. Now, the South Georgia Conference Board of Trustees, they've extended the deadline. They said they will extend the deadline until December 31st, 2024, which would allow churches to see what happens at the General Conference in 2024. But again, in reality, that would mean that we would have to have our decision made by June of 2024 so that could be acted upon by the conference. But the language states that it expires on December 31st, 2023, and shall not be used after that date. So there is a little uncertainty even that we can push a 2024 deadline. So now, the South Georgia is working with churches. Bishop Graves really wants to work with churches, even churches that decide to disaffiliate. Recently, they had a special called session of the conference, and that happened in August. And that the whole purpose was to just take up churches disaffiliating, and that's where 62 of the churches disaffiliated. Okay, and he's also the bishop of the Alabama West Florida Conference, and he's having 3 special called sessions over there to take up these issues. So, you know, these are the hard deadlines, and you see them up there. There's possibilities, though, that these deadlines can be shifted or may shift. So, what have we done so far as a church to prepare? I'd like to give you an update on that from what the church council has done so far and what our different committees have done. First, our trustees have reviewed our deeds. They pulled them from the county records. We wanted to make sure we knew exactly how many pieces of property. You know, we just have this big complex, but it is made up of several different pieces of property that we own. So we wanted to make sure what those pieces were, you know, what we had. So we've done that. Finance has reviewed our accounts and looked at the funds available. If the church decided that it was going to disaffiliate, the funds would be available for that. And the funds would be available, and we would not dip into our reserve or emergency funds, nor would we be dipping into any restricted funds. We're having these informational sessions right now. This is the last one that we're going to do. And then we're preparing a survey for the congregation. And that survey is going to go out in November to get kind of a temperature of the congregation, to see what y'all are thinking about this. So you will see that in November. And we ask that each and every one of you, we're going to make this survey available to everybody, and we ask that that you take the time. It should not be that long, and to fill this out and just to give us your honest feedback on that. And then last, at our last church council meeting, we budgeted some money for professional fees. So that would be like our survey software that we're going to use. If we decided to disaffiliate, we would have to do some legal work. We'd have to reincorporate the church. We'd have to make sure that our deeds are properly done again. So, there'd be things like that we'd have to do. So we budgeted for professional fees. And that's to the point that we're at right now. So I hope that this information was helpful. Again, thank y'all very much for coming. This is going to be a journey that we're going to have to take as a congregation together. Please be assured, or rest assured, knowing that God is going to be with us on this journey. That He will be with us as we make the journey toward whatever decision we make. Thank y'all again. Jeremy, if you could, please pray for us as we leave.